If I had searched the world over, I could not have found more perfect postdoctoral fellows for the Humanities for the Public Good program. I know that I'm supposed to lead with their professional accomplishments. I hope I can get through this. But I value them even more highly for being such emotionally intelligent, caring, compassionate, generous, ethical, and kind human beings. There is the humanities mindset that Catherine discussed so eloquently yesterday, and there is also the humanities, let's say, heart set. Ashley Cheyemi McNeil completed her bi-national dual PhD in Literary Studies and American Studies, which included a year at the German Obama Institute, I probably have that name wrong, before joining the HPG project, where she brilliantly led multiple working groups developing plans for different aspects of HPG. She then headed to Full Spectrum Features, a documentary-making collective, as an ACLS Leading Edge Fellow. They obviously saw exactly what we did and immediately found ways to keep her. She is now their Director of Education and Research and has just secured an NEH grant to lead a summer teaching institute to help high school teachers develop plans for using the documentaries the group produces. Laura Perry joined HPG just in time for COVID to move all our work online. I keep saying to people, I keep being shocked that Laura wasn't here because she was so fully present on Zoom that it just seems that she was here for 2 years. She had just completed her PhD in English at Madison, where she also worked as a journal editor and developed very impressive podcasting skills and networks. She's now the Assistant Director for Research and Public Engagement at the Humanities Center at Washington University in St. Louis. She oversees a number of campus community projects such as Divided City and co-organizes the Mellon-funded Summer Studio Lab, a community-engaged hub at a local high school, among many other things. And I will turn things over to them.
I'm up here just briefly to give you a little bit of a sense of what we're going to be doing today. So when Ashley and I were thinking about how best to both reflect on our gratitude for where we've been and also to talk about where HPG helped us to get to, we thought that we would share some stories about what is most exciting and what is a really successful example to us in our work of humanities at work in the world and things that we have been able to do because of what we learned from all of you and especially what we learned from you, Teresa, during our time as HPG postdocs. So first, Ashley will share, and then I'll pop up and share, and then we will have some questions for you all in sort of the spirit of our working groups where we learn so much from talking with you and pushing you and kind of being there for you in these conversations. So that's what's up. I'll toss it to you, Ashley.
Okay, it's really special to see so many familiar faces, to see folks here in person that I think we learned a lot together, and it was such an honor to be able to hold space for so many folks who came together in community, especially during a very tough time, right? I think that Humanities for the Public Good was such a wonderful adventure and such an ambitious charge, and then when COVID hit, it also became something different and more, because we were thinking about the public good and we were thinking about community and holding one another with these values during a time of global crisis. And so it forced a reevaluation and a different kind of heart work, as Teresa sometimes says. And I think that everybody showed up in that in kind of profound ways that continue to guide me every day in the work that I do today. So it's really fun to be able to come back here in this closing session, in this closing symposium for this community that in no way is conditioned only to this grant or what was started here, right? So with that, here's the clicker. I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea about what I do as Director of Education and Research at Full Spectrum Features. because there's a lot of ways that HPG has continued to be a lodestar for me in my work in this nonprofit, non-academic space, right? One of my heroes is Grace Lee Boggs, as some of you already know. And this is just a little quote from her that I share with a lot of the teachers that I get to work with, but also that I have posted on my wall, and it's something that I reflect on a lot. And it says, "You cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it, and then responsible for changing it." And I thought that that sounded really nice, but it wasn't until I got to work so closely with our HPG working groups, with our interns, with all of the faculty and the staff and community partners that are part of this work, that I felt this on a more visceral level, right? And so it has continued to shape how I approach what I think about doing as humanistic work in community, right? And still centering the public good. So I do these really fun projects that are open educational resources, right? And we call them cinematic digital history projects. That's what I do with my time, with my energy, with my team these days at Full Spectrum Features. And we think about community a lot, and we think about how do we help our audiences, which are primarily learners, like K through 12 learners and educators, right, who use and engage with these open educational resources that we create. How do we help them see themselves as belonging to society, as belonging to other communities, right, as belonging to and being a stakeholder of histories that they may feel very far apart from, right? So my department, my team, we focus on making our educational resources to expose and kind of surface histories that are often covered over or hidden or obscured from what most standard K through 12 curricula make available in the U.S. So to date, we have been focusing our projects on aspects of Japanese American history that often don't make the history books, right? So our first project, for example, really honed in and focused on the forced removal. Most folks had about 2 weeks to pack up their lives and sell their businesses and get themselves off to the assembly centers, right, after Executive Order 9066 was dropped. So our first project focused on that slice of history, for example, right? The second project on Japanese American history that I'd like to just give you a little bit of a preview here was on resettlement. And so when folks started to be allowed to leave the incarceration camps, what was that process like for them, right? Most folks were now in like their second, if not third, displacement from their home on the West Coast. And so we really wanted to think about, well, what is that story, right? It's a story that we rarely see being taught in schools. And so that's what we did. We focused on resettlement. And just to give you an idea of why we are putting all of our chips in this bucket, if you will, it's a prime time for us to be thinking about what impact looks like in humanistic storytelling and education. Illinois was the first among what is now, I think, 10 other states that mandate either Asian American histories or ethnic studies to be taught in K through 12 spaces. Most of these mandates don't come with any teeth. They don't come with any budget from the legislator or any kind of implementation plan. And so it's been up to us, kind of on the community grassroots level, to find a structure and devise a structure for that implementation to support our educators and our students around these legislated mandates. So what I'd like to share with you is a little snippet of, so you can get an idea of what these like cinematic digital history projects are that I'm speaking of, and so that you can kind of see some of the work that we do and how I see all of the community building lessons that I learned through HPG filtering into my work today. So with that, I hope that you all will be down to watch a little trailer. It's about 56 seconds, but this is a trailer of a short film that we have for our resettlement project, and then I'd like to show you a little bit of the learning website that kind of interweaves with the film, okay? So without further ado, let me hit play. And again, this is a short trailer for a short film that is part of our project.
told you not to put on customers' clothes.
おじいちゃん、お母さん意地悪。
My husband likes you being here. You always pay the rent on time.
Quick, slow, slow, quick.
Your daughter is missing a figure that teaches discipline.
You don't get it. You aren't American.
I'm so sorry. Can't even get a simple job right.
Okay. So that's a trailer for this film that is embedded into, again, our digital history project that focuses on this period of history, right, of resettlement, specifically in Chicago. Chicago happened to be the largest resettled area for the community after the camp started to be closed because, of course, Japanese Americans weren't allowed to go back home to the West Coast, right, initially. And so they had to settle elsewhere, and the government very specifically pushed them into the Midwest here, right? Where their promise to the government and their condition of freedom was to assimilate into white American culture. So what do I mean about thinking about how we engage learners, the general public, but in particular young learners, right, in this humanistic approach of how we think about this history that is often obscured, right? So our bet is that if we can help students connect on a human level, empathetically, right, to a story, which hopefully is done through this film, then we can, bring them into kind of more the curricular and the learning world in a different way that might have more of a lasting impact than if you were learning about dates and facts and figures for a test alone, right? So what we tried to do is to continue weaving the film world into the learning world. So what we have are a series of cinemagraphs, is what we call them. They're basically like little scenes from the film and GIFs that you can go and you can continue to think about what each of the main characters was experiencing and the part of history and thematic learning that we're trying to elevate through the film. So this is a scene from the film that you saw just a very short snippet of, and we particularly placed certain kind of like objects, if you will, within the film when we shot it. So we have an American flag, for example, that becomes this portal as a hyper object into a learning theme, which of course in this case is about Americanization and assimilation, right? But something that Alan, you were mentioning yesterday in your wonderful talk, there you are, sorry, was thinking about like what objects represent the humanities, right? And I really appreciated that. And how do we cultivate, like my question to that and my wondering and continued mission here is how do we cultivate and understand how we often already have these relationships with humanities objects, right? And so one thing that we do is we ask students to take a hot second and think about how do you think about your relationship with the American flag? What does it mean for you and your family and your community, right? Before they then go into this more curated set of resources and primary sources, and kind of our own interpretation and description of what these materials mean and what the American flag could mean for this community in 1950 Chicago, right, at that time. These sources are all curated not just by me by any means. We have a wonderful set and team of historians that we work closely with, and they're led by our lead academic advisor and wonderful partner, Jasmine Alinder, who's the Dean of Humanities at UC Santa Cruz. So this is just like a little snippet, right, of what I mean by cinematic digital history project. There's other features, there's multiple cinemagraphs. We also have this kind of fun thing where you can ask the character a question and break the fourth wall and try to continue to have a built relationship and engagement with the character themselves, right? So the reason why I'm going through some of these particularities is because I think that my humanities training, which I give a lot of credit to my work as a postdoc here at HPG, really helped position me to understand the power of continuing that learning thread of narrative and the impact on the human through a learning space, right? And I think that I learned a lot about that in our working groups that we were able to lead. I remember conversations with our former colleague Lindsay Maddock, for example, on this topic a lot, right, around that sustained engagement with students. And so this is just like kind of one thing that I'm excited about these days as we continue to go into our next project, which is going to be focusing on the redress movement from the 80s and before. So let me go back to our slides. Yes. Okay. Another thing that is really important to the projects that we do, and I mentioned this at dinner a little bit with some of the other presenters, is that all of this is built from a space of community, right? We do a lot of listening, and it is all kind of built from the desires, the needs, and what our community tells us is the thing that needs to be elevated, the story to tell. So this is just a quick picture of Kat Nagasawa is our web producer from the project, and so we were doing a group interview with some of the elders in the community in Chicago. This was taken in the basement at the Midwest Buddhist Temple, which is a anchor point for the Japanese American community in Chicago. And we were talking to folks who had all lived through this history, right? And it was a really special time that they gave freely to us and very generously and honestly with us. And so we hold that as not only the cornerstone of how we build out our projects, but also as a continued process of engagement and how we honor our past and our ancestors, right? And I think that was a value that always came up in our HPG working groups as well, is thinking about on whose shoulders do we stand and how do we always bring that forward. This is just a sweet photo taken during the filming of the short film. And this is Jean Mishima on your right-hand side, and she's actually the woman who we based the film off of. She was the young kind of teenager girl in that trailer that you saw. And it was her lived experience, right? She was the one that we modeled the entire narrative off of. And this is her and Sam, and they're sharing pictures from their camp. They were in different camps. She was in Topaz and he was at Poston. And so they were just kind of reminiscing and comparing their incarceration experiences. And again, these are all camp survivors, right? So people from the community who lived this history, who shared generously with us about their experience. And then, one was a main character, and then we had cameos from the other two. So it's just, this special way, and I don't think that we would have thought to be bringing folks in and the community in such an engaged and present way if I hadn't spent wonderful time with you all ruminating on the possibilities of what true engagement and reciprocity actually looks like and feels like. Okay. The last thing that I want to do is just share very quickly is that on the other prong of my day-to-day, beyond building out these open educational resources, is also training and empowering teachers, right, to use the resources in classrooms, whether it is ours or not. But how do I help them with this kind of impossible mandate and charge of teaching a unit of Asian American history in their classrooms, as it is in Illinois? So this is some propaganda that one of my teacher fellows, I ran a fellowship this past fall for about 6 teachers to develop lesson plans about creative responses to Asian American histories. And she was really interested in these cartoons and some of the propaganda that was emerging in the late 1900s to around anti-Chinese immigration. And so she was thinking about this, and she's like, okay, I teach elementary school. She also taught special ed, and she was wondering how she could take this kind of cartoons and weave it into some of her own lesson plans and curriculum. Around that same time, so again, this is in Chicago, there was a migrant camp that was being set up at kitty corner to her school, right? So she's standing on the picture on the right-hand side, she's standing on her school ground, and then the camp was supposed to be across the way there. And And that was a very present thing in the media and the news, and certainly in the minds of her students and administrators at her elementary school. And so there was this big kind of uproar by the neighborhood that was surrounding the school in this area of Chicago, of Brighton Park, where they didn't want the camp there, right? There was a lot of pushback. There was a rally. There was protests. It got to be like quite heated, right, in Brighton Park. These are just a couple images that my teacher fellow took of lampposts that were actually like on the sidewalk where her school was, right? And so you'll see that these are from the protesters and from the surrounding community. We will not feel safe if there is a camp across the way. And then there's another sign here that is saying this is not temporary, but notice that there's kanji there as well, right? So Brighton Park also has a fairly large kind of overlaying population of Asian Americanness, right? So this brought to her like a different layer of complexity, right? Where she's already thinking about these historical propaganda, anti-Chinese, posters, and she was already thinking about how do I pull this into my classroom, and then there's clearly this, this population of Asian Americans in her own neighborhood who are almost repeating that same process, right? And so that was something that she really wrestled with, and she was very open and honest with us, and we were able to help her wrestle together through that complexity for her elementary school students. What she ended up doing was to think about how do I mend, if you will, those old propaganda pieces, right, that were trying to be exclusionary and try to force people out. And so she took her students through a process of just kind of careful looking and listening at what these messages were conveying, right, that were around them. And this is what her students came up with. They then reinvented those posters that they were seeing, right, about not feeling safe, etc. And they decided to say, okay, well, what's my message, right? Where's my voice? How do I want to contribute to this conversation that's literally happening on the block of our school? And mind you, these are like 3rd to 5th graders here, right? And this is just a couple examples of what they came up with, right? And so imagine these as poster board sizes, yeah? Okay. So all kids should be allowed to go to school, and in the little heart, I don't know if you can see it, always believe in your dreams. And then we have an interesting interpretation of different flags, just kind of this inverted but repeated language of saying, instead of saying no, 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 right? They're saying all are welcome, and that we'll accept you, and that everyone is approved. And so, this is just something that I wanted to leave us with, because I think, again, bringing in this idea of everybody has agency, right? And that we are all part of how we can design and redesign what that narrative is and where our voice shows up. That was something that was ever present in HPG, right? We, with Teresa's guidance and by design, pulled together these working groups that were meant to be, not homogenous, right? We had faculty and students and staff in every single group by design, right? And so just thinking about how every voice, how we're stronger when every voice is present, and when we are always interrogating and thinking about our contribution to that story that's being told, is like a direct way that, that kind of value is now showing up in this work of 3rd and 5th graders here at Brighton Park in Chicago. So, thank you. I'll pass this over to you.
I don't know why I decided to put my papers at a hypotenuse to me. So I think you all can see, those of you who didn't already know how amazing Ashley was, what an awesome opportunity it was for me to overlap with her for a year. And I can't thank the both of you enough. I was literally just thanking Ashley like a half an hour ago for, allowing me to join the HPG team when I did, and really just yeah, there are really no words for how great it was to ride that roller coaster with you all through that time period, and also to get to know you. And I also, just to say one thing while this is up on the screen, I love that we're both talking about K through 12 education, because as you'll see, I'm going to get into this, and I think that I know there's a national conversation in the humanities about the humanities pipeline and thinking about how do we not wait until first year of college to start thinking about the humanities and how the humanities can be meaningful in students' lives. And I think that thinking about K through 12 and how to really support those amazing K through 12 teachers in not only pushing back against legislators who are trying to tell them that they shouldn't be teaching this kind of history, but also to empower them to see that they are some of the most frontline humanities practitioners who are really being able to introduce the next generation to important histories and storytelling and the power of the humanities. So thank you for doing that work, Ashley. All right, I'm going to try the clicker. Okay. So as Teresa said, I'm at WashU now, and I was the HPG postdoc for August 2020 to January 2022. And I learned so much. I mean, we formed these lovely communities of practice and friendship with the staff and the students and the faculty in our weekly working group meetings. And one moment that really stands out, I was reflecting on this as we were talking about what we wanted to share today, was the first time I met Ashley and Teresa in person, which wasn't until July 2021, where we knew each other so well by then. It was strange actually to hear your voices not mediated by the computer screen, because I knew exactly what you sounded like on Zoom. And so we gathered in the Obermann Library, and we spent the whole day with just giant Post-its everywhere. Like, I think by the end of the day, those giant sticky Post-its were on every wall, every table surface, and we mapped out what the next 5 years could look like. So from this moment where we were still dreaming and designing and figuring out to implementation. And it was just an incredible behind-the-scenes sort of peek into what it looks like and how to pull the levers of building a program in higher ed, and practical and inspiring. And it's also an example of how collaborative and welcoming Teresa was too, that Ashley and I were just full partners in that brainstorm, and really never felt like there was a moment where we weren't valued partners and kind of dreaming and building this plane while we were flying it. And just how much Teresa shared her expertise and insights with us too, from how to design an admissions plan for students to how to build the long-lasting community that will make something like a new program succeed, that I think has come up again and again. And it's because it's potentially scary to propose something new, or scary for some people, and so having those tight bonds of knowing each other and trusting each other is just so important. And it's not something you can do without a little bit of the Teresa magic. So I draw on lessons from that every day and from our wild COVID postdoc ride. And especially in my position at WashU, where I'm asked to plan long-term, design new programs, support existing work, and build relationships with the most, I was going to say cranky, I'll say conventional tenure track faculty, and the most radical and impatient of community partners, and somehow build a bridge that's strong enough that they can work together in the same space. And I'm biased because this is my maybe 6th year of being involved closely in an interdisciplinary center, but I think that humanities centers are some of the best places for work like that to be supported, because you need that infrastructure and the community of a research center like Obermann, like the one where I am, to make some of this meaningful and sustainable humanities work possible. And to borrow a phrase from Ashley, I think that is the secret sauce. Which I was like betting with myself you were going to say that during your presentation. It would have been better if you had, but you said it yesterday. So today I'm going to talk about one of the most exciting and tricky and boundary-pushing aspects of my role in the Humanities Center at WashU, where the lines between research and engagement get blurry and are negotiated on a weekly basis, and also where I've gained such a better sense of what putting the humanities to work can mean off campus and outside the traditional classroom. So we call it the Sumner Studio Lab, and as Teresa mentioned, it's a community hub. It's a space that's 2 rooms and a small patio that's located at Sumner High School, which you see pictured on the screen, which is a historically black high school that was the first black high school west of the Mississippi. And it was founded in 1875. Tina Turner, Chuck Berry, Arthur Ashe are all just a small number of very famous alums who've gone there. And it's really hard to overstate Sumner's contribution to black culture and also to the neighborhood of the Ville, which was a historically, and still is, a historically black neighborhood in North St. Louis that's just about 15 minutes off of campus. And so to understand how this community space came to be, I have to tell you a little bit about Sumner High School and why we ended up being invited into there. So at its height, Sumner enrolled about 5,000 students, but by 2020 there were fewer than 500, and it once got down to as low as about 270. And that's because of a range of things, which you probably all can imagine, of long decades of racist disinvestment, of school voucher systems, allowing students to choose to go to county schools, of changing industries in the area. And so in 2021, St. Louis Public Schools, as you can see up there, threatened to close Sumner. And there was a huge outcry from alums. It was also part of a larger national conversation about the importance of black K-12 schools in supporting neighborhood stability and being the anchor of the community. And that's really what Sumner was and continues to be for this Ville neighborhood. It's right in the heart of it, and there's so many alums there. Sometimes when we're walking around on the street outside of Sumner, you just meet an alum who's like, "You're near the school I went to," and then they tell you their entire story. So it's very close-knit community. So a group of alums and arts and cultural organizations and local nonprofits came together to craft a proposal to the school board to prevent Sumner's closure. So the local museums, the Shakespeare Festival, and it was also especially led by For the Ville, who is a very close community partner of the center now, and is a community-based tourism and arts organization created by multi-generational Ville residents and volunteers to restore pride in the legacy of the Ville. And this looks like they have a Juneteenth bike ride, they have historical walking tours, well, those take you around and show you, Annie Malone's house, Portal College, Arthur Ashe's tennis court, and sort of the rich history of the Ville. And they also have grander plans for turning the Ville neighborhood into a cultural boulevard that really celebrates the history of Black St. Louis and also the future generations that will continue to make the Ville what it is. So the recovery plan proposed new pathways in arts, activism, and local history, which were imagined to not only increase enrollment, because SLPS, the school board, said, you can, fine, we won't close you right now because you're making a lot of noise about it, but you have to increase enrollment 10% every year over the next 3 years. And so that's the moment that we're in now. We're coming to the end of that 3 years, and I can tell you that they now have over 500 students, so they have done it from the low of 270 to over 500. So I'm telling you the happy ending of the story now. Don't worry, the school's still open. So if they were imagined to increase enrollment, but also to really fully engage these students, many of whom didn't grow up in the Ville, many of whom maybe moved to St. Louis from other places, transplants like myself, with this great history that they were in, with the history of Sumner, with the history of the Ville, with the history of Black St. Louis and the Black Midwest. That's sort of when WashU came in, but not quite yet. So this is when the co-founder For the Ville, Aaron Williams, who is a WashU alum from the architecture program and is now a community organizer who is deeply involved in the Ville neighborhood. He was inspired by growing up in a historically black neighborhood in Kansas City that has a really similar history to the Ville, but is now a thriving cultural district in the way that he's imagining that the Ville can become. So that's when Aaron reached out and drew upon his existing relationships with Jean Ullman, who is the former director of the center where I work, and also Bruce Lindsay, who's a faculty in architecture, who were the PIs of the Divided City Mellon grant, which is a long-running grant. I think it ended up going, well, let's see, this is 2020. Oh, it ended up going for 10 years. Okay, it started in 2014. And For the Ville's invitation, and it's really important for me to emphasize that because WashU doesn't have the greatest history of being a good neighbor in St. Louis, and so one thing that was really important for all of us involved in this project was to tread carefully and kind of help in the way we were asked and really check in with community members throughout to make sure that, you know, we are not taking resources, but we're bringing resources and helping in the way that we're asked. So For the Ville's invitation, Jean and Bruce started thinking about the ways that Divided City and WashU Center for the Humanities could support these efforts and support the Sumner Recovery Plan in a similar way that, you know, the Shakespeare Festival was in there teaching students and running the drama program. So I was hired in January 2022. Thank you, Teresa, for making that possible. And after our proposal was approved by the Sumner Recovery Board, and actually that was kind of a tough process. There were a lot of back and forth meetings where they were really pushing us, like, what is the benefit to Sumner? Why are why is this money going to WashU? Could it go to Sumner in this way? How is this going to be beneficial? What happens when you leave? And so it was kind of the greatest, hardest start to a project that I've been part of because they spoke freely about their skepticism, and I think it set us up for a really great relationship. So in summer 2022, we launched the Sumner Studio Lab with funding from the Divided City Mellon grant, and we pitched it as a community hub where it'd be located in an annex building off of this building that was built when they had more students than they could house in this original building, and so now there was, they were using it as storage, basically. So we would have events, community meetings, workshops, high school interns. But as all of you know in this room, I bet, when you say we launched something, that doesn't mean it exists yet in any kind of neat way. That usually the website language comes much before the actual reality starts to live up to that. So let me show you where our space was going to be, and this is what it looked like in July 2022 when I first saw it, when I first opened the door and was like, oh. So that's it. So you can see it used to be a former daycare. So it's slightly hard to tell. Oh, sorry. It's slightly hard. I want to be in front of the mic. Slightly hard to tell in front of these photos, but all of these chairs are tiny. Like, they are not adult-sized chairs. And if you see on the photo on the right, there were cribs, there were toys, there were those little things with wheels and a tray where, like, you can run around if you're a tiny child. There were a bunch of bubbles, which were fun. So that summer we spent a lot of very humid St. Louis days dragging these things into another space, painting the walls, going to IKEA, and also it actually ended up being really great that we had to do so much grunt work, although I have to admit that when people asked me what I was doing for my job at a humanities center, and I was like, oh, we're going to go paint a room today. It was like, okay. That's not usually what humanities work involves. But it was great that we were there and having so much kind of slow, in-person, very sweaty work, because it meant that my co-director and I, Matt, had a chance to really get to know each other, because we kind of been thrown into this, arranged project, and we didn't really know each other. We didn't know if we could trust each other. We had to he used to work in the real estate office, and I was like, does that mean like on board with how things have been happening. So there was a lot of that, and he's great, by the way, and I think he likes me too. But we also got to know all of the Sumner staff. So our neighbors upstairs, Stacy and Nicole at the nonprofit Economic Empowerment Center, the security personnel like Officer Goolsby, who we wooed with a lot of sandwiches, and also the social worker at Sumner, Miss G, which is what the students call her, Miss Grayer, and who's since become a really important partner. She's on our community advisory board. She works with the interns a lot. We get to hear a lot about her shoes because she's a huge fan of shoes. So looking back, like that was a really important, if it was the most physically uncomfortable piece of the project. And I wish it had involved less putting together IKEA furniture. So here's what the space looks like today. And so every piece of furniture that you can see here has wheels. So we can really easily move it around. So we can set it up for, this is a workshop. We can set it up for speakers. You see the sort of curtain in the back, or we can have classes in there. You can also just roll everything out and do some yoga on the rug, which is what some people have done. And so once we had the space sorted, we needed to keep building the team. So we hired Shameen Akhtar, who is on the left, who was getting her master's in urban design. And then on the right is Crystal Payne, who is a PhD student in English. And they were our first graduate fellows in community engagement. And so they got to really define what that position was, because we never had grad fellows in community engagement before. And you've seen here they're tabling at a local town hall that was at a urgent care facility sort of 2 blocks down from Sumner, to share the Sumner Studio Lab activities with the neighborhood and also to hear feedback on their needs and interests. And this was a kind of a key part of it, because we often heard from people who weren't involved with Sumner, oh, I thought Sumner closed. And so part of this was also being part of the outreach team for Sumner. Like, it's open and really cool things are happening, and you should send your kids here so that enrollment increases. And it was, an unusual fellowship in the sense that they almost never talked to the WashU community, because we really deliberately, especially in these first stages, tried to keep that line of separation pretty clear, so that we could grow what this was going to be and then have the larger weight of WashU come in. So there are 3 key pieces of the Sumner Studio Lab. Our high school interns, who are just awesome. Public workshops that we do with the approval of the Community Advisory Board, who receive every proposal and tweak it and look at everything from like the budget to the people involved and really, offer their feedback on it. And then engaged classes. So I have no idea how I'm doing on time. I forgot to look them up. Wrapping? I'll wrap. Okay. So here are our interns. We started with 4, and then they all wanted to come back the next year. So that was adorable. And now we have 8. They're making a commemorative seltzer can about Sumner up top with a local seltzer company, where the sales of the cans will benefit the Sumner High School. They're building a little free library in the middle. They also hosted events. They went on tours. And then we also collaborate. There's a picture there. You'll just have to imagine it. We also collaborate with local orgs and advocates to host public workshops for neighborhood residents. So the one on the left here is a workshop on community development and how new buildings come to be approved and built. So to allow, which I learned so much about that process that I didn't know, to allow people to push back if they want to about the developments that's happening in their community that they don't approve of. And then over here, this was in partnership with local politicians and a bunch of students at different high schools to think about activism and advocacy. And so the woman standing up in blue in the back is Alicia Saunier, who's an alderwoman in St. Louis and also was a frontline activist during the Ferguson uprising. And they were talking to students about what would you be an activist about if you could be, and also making buttons. And there's Erin, teaching people about community engagement. All right. And then we also have engaged classes where students, their class meets in the Sumner Studio Lab space, and then their work of that semester is to work with a community partner and design a final project that serves the community partner's needs. And so it's taking advantage of being in the space and being off campus, which really shapes their projects. So that's what the first 2 years looked like, and I'm glad to say that we got provost funding to keep being there for at least another 2, so we get to graduate from high school and go be there for 4 years. So that is the Sumner Project.
Let's keep this up here because
Okay,
it seems
cool.
so delightful. I know that we're heading, precariously down close to the end of our scheduled hour. But for those of you who have worked with Laura and I before, you know that we have some questions for you, and that we have some ideas of that we would love to be in community with you around, and to hear your thoughts on. Should I just go through them a little bit? Okay. So for those of you, just maybe in your own in your own mind, and if you want to shout it out, great. But first, kind of from an objective position, let's just recall your contribution to HPG, right? Like objectively, what did you do? How did you make meaning with this grant, with this work, with our leadership, and together, right? So go back into the recesses of your mind and think about what was your role. What reports did you write for us? What presentations did you make over several symposiums, right? And now we'd love for you to also share and think together, and this is including folks who may not have been at Iowa, some of our guests here. But, we were talking a little bit at Catherine's presentation, and Brady brought up this idea of the ripple effect, right? So that even when things don't go exactly according to plan, as they never do, there's still impact, right? And part of our job is to perceive and elevate and take advantage of that impact. So to that extent, what ripple effect or change has HPG made possible here? And we would love for people to actually raise your hand or just shout it out, right? What ripple effect, sure, and we have a mic that can be passed around. What ripple effect or change has HPG made possible? And that can be like a structural thing. It can be within dispositions. It can be your own interiority, right? A habit of mind or heart that has changed now for you. But maybe if we could just take 3 people or so. Deborah?
Thank you so much for being here. So I'm Deborah Whaley. I'm a professor in the Department of English in the program in African American Studies. So insofar as HPG is concerned, I was both in a working group and I received a grant to reconceive a graduate course. So I was in the Health and Social Justice working group. And I think, Anna, you were in it with me as well, and Sarah Bond, and a lot of amazing people. And so we did a lot of great work. We did a couple presentations. There were also moments where things didn't go as well insofar as what we were able to do in the amount of time of the grant. So the ripple effect, something that came out of it that was great, is one of the colleagues in the working group after the grant, we got together and decided to do a project on filming women who have had less than positive experiences at the University of Iowa hospital and clinics when giving birth, Black women in particular. So we decided to do this film project, just interviewing women who were brave enough to come forward, one of which was actually a physician at UIHC who did not have the best experience. And so we know there's a lot of discussion right now about Black maternal health care and the disparate numbers of Black women who have been adversely affected, including death. And it was difficult. It was quite emotional, but it was really nice to see what we could do post the working group that was related, but a different thing altogether that would help, we hope, physicians at UIHC, as well as community members through these short films, to help them see some of the racial and class and gendered aspects of Black maternal health, and even the ways in which outside of class, right, you can be of middle or upper middle class or however you want to frame it, and still be adversely affected by what's going on in the healthcare system insofar as Black maternal health is concerned. So thank you. This was possible because of the Obermann, because of the mentorship of both of you in the working group, and you set an amazing model to think about how we can take the work farther. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. That's beautiful. Other ripple effects, maybe one more. We know they're out there. Brady.
Hello, I'm Brady Crean, and I work over in the Graduate College and have been involved in HPG and on the advisory board in a variety of ways. And so one of the things that I do in my role is I work with a lot of graduate students on thinking about what their next steps are after graduate school. And so a lot of times that conversation involves discussions of how to broach these topics with mentors. Because as we know, particularly for graduate students, mentoring is a hugely, hugely important part of their experience. And we know that mentors also wield an incredible amount of influence over what our graduate students are able to do. And I have noticed a lot of changes in the conversations that I've had with graduate students over the course of the last couple of years, particularly around exploring options outside of academia and wanting to do publicly engaged work. And not just, and moving away from being concerned about having conversations with their advisors to having had that conversation, their advisor will say, that's great, I don't necessarily know how to support you in this, but you should go talk to these people, you should get involved in HPG, or you should go do these things. And so just I think that change in the mentorship that has such profound impacts on our graduate students, and that the change in that conversation and the underlying culture around what is not only an acceptable but an exciting pathway for graduate students is something that I have definitely seen in conversations with the students that I've worked with over the course of the last 5 years, and it makes a huge difference in those students' lives and the kinds of things they choose to pursue after graduate school.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sure, yeah. And while the mic's going over, I just want to highlight, like, those are two very different kind of stories, but those impacts are tremendous, right, that Brady and Deborah shared, and, like, with different communities, but also in, like, overlaying ways. And so, you know, just really cool that Iowa gets to reap some of these benefits. Yeah.
So I'm Antoinette Burton from the University of Illinois. This is the view from outside Iowa. So I've been so grateful for just the name HPG because it's a beacon. It's a reminder in the sea of acronyms and all their specificities about what we should really be thinking about. The public discourse about the humanities in crisis and about the nature of public humanities and what it should look like is so overwhelming. It's so constant. It's so relentless. And to know that HPG was out there doing, I didn't know half the things you all were doing. I mean, I tried to follow from afar, knowing it was being led by Teresa, and really sort of embedding itself in the institution, but also in the related, in the related communities. It's just so important. It's a bit like the book series that Teresa co-edits at University of Iowa Press called
Humanities in Public Life.
I think these words and these they're leads, and when you go beneath them, there's so much richness there. But they do stand out in a very busy, loud, deafening mess of crisis that we're living in. And I just want to say that beyond Iowa, I think, and partly through the HWW consortium that we're both in, I think this project has had tremendous multiplier effects. So thank you.
Thank you, Antoinette. Maybe just one more question. in the spirit of this is, our final day, the last day of the closing symposium of the grant, which feels weird to say. But we know that this will ring true for many people here. And we're wondering what idea or habit of mind, to borrow a phrase from yesterday, or practice, do you know that you are going to be carrying forward? That you gleaned, that you cultivated in community here through HPG, made possible through HPG and Teresa's leadership. Do you know that you're going to be carrying forward? Yeah, in the back, I can't quite see, but yes, please. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Christine Shea from Spanish and Portuguese. I was talking about this last week with a colleague of mine in CSD, in Communication Sciences and Disorders. And due to these sorts of conversations that I've been having with him, with other colleagues, etc., I don't think I will ever be able to do research in the same way, ever. Yeah. Framing everything in terms of social context now, in terms of impact, in terms of the types of questions you ask, in terms of I do experimental work in terms of the types of participants. And there are bits and pieces of this conversation that are happening around, but I think bringing it together for me happened through this space and these opportunities. So it really has shifted, I feel, in a very fundamental way, what I think about and how I think about kind of what the purpose of it is. I know it sounds a little overwhelming, but it's true. It really has. It's been a very, very positive and meaningful shift. And I also feel a lot angrier than I did in the past. I feel much more upset when my eyes have been open to a lot of things that were there all the time. So I have found it very, very meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, this is sort of not on our agenda, but I'd love it if we could all join in a round of applause for Teresa.
Oh, for heaven's sake.